and welcome to another painting video. In this video, I'll be painting the first squad for my brand new 40k army, a Crusader squad for the Black Templars. I've always been a fan of the Black Templars, and with the range refresh, I thought it was time to join the Eternal Crusade. I'm painting the Crusaders in a very rough, grimdark style, which is inspired by the grimdark technique of Trovarian miniatures. I'm also using some new paints of the John Blanche set from the Army Painter, which, if you're familiar, is a great excuse to paint this army with. I gotta say, this color scheme really pops on the tabletop. From the dirty and battle-worn black armor to the John Blanche inspired bases. Well, let's begin, shall we? After priming the model black, I'm going to establish a base for weathering the armor. I chose Doombull Brown, which is a rich red brown. I paint the entire armor. Alternatively, you can paint the entire model, but parts like hoses and the soft armor I kept black. Then I enhanced this step by painting certain areas with Agrax Brown. You could do a dry brush so all the edges are nice and bright. This might look a bit odd because we're painting black armor, but let's go on to the next step. On to the black armor. For my black, I chose Army Painter's Matte Black because I really like the finish, but you can of course use any black you have on hand. There are two ways to do this. One is with a sponge and the other is with an old brush. I tried both and I like the control an old brush gives me. Basically, I go around all the armor panels with black and make sure I don't hit the edges. The edges you'll want to remain brown for the weathering effect. Like the paint has been scraped off due to excessive use. You can either make it as extreme or subtle if you want on different spots of the model. I then use Agrax Brown to touch up some of the borders. I've actually started doing this step after I painted all the armor, but it's mostly to make sure the brown edges are nice and bright. Next, I start volume highlighting the armor. This is different from edge highlighting, where you look at a panel as a 3D object and simulate the light reflection on it. I first use the darkness from the John Blanche set and sketch out where I want the highlights to come. I then brighten the highlight with Dark Reaper. I keep it in the sketch. Personally, I like a rough and sketchy style, but this will also work if you glaze on the paints to create a more smoother effect. I come in with Thunderhawk Blue. I keep this color to a minimum so the armor will still read as black instead of blue. The final highlight is Pharisian Gray, which I use very sparingly. Basically dot some of the armor panels. Now this will look really rough, and this paint job really is a trusted process paint job, but we'll get there. For the red armor, I'm applying the same technique. I start with a base coat of Mephiston Red, feathering and dabbing it on, trying not to hit the edges. I then apply 3 highlights. The first is Evil Sun Scarlet. The second is Fury Vermilion, also from the John Blanche set. And I then end with dots of Wild Rider Red to create a dirty and weathered red armor effect. Either again use a sponge or an old brush, whichever you prefer. In this step, I'm painting all the white armor, which is mostly the shoulder guards. I paint everything with Gargoyle Gray, but I also paint the Tabards and the many purity seals I have glued on these models. I then repeat the process with Worn Stone, leaving the previous layer showing in the recesses. And I end the white armor panels with Ivory White from the John Blanche set, which is a great warm white that complements the white shoulder guards very well. I am not quite finished with the purity seals. I first use matte black to paint some script on the seals. I either make some dots and lines or paint small figures. They're gonna look at it from a distance, so it just needs to look like there's something on the seals. I then mix Skeleton Horde with Lamia Medium and add this to the Tabards and seals to filter them in a dirty ochre. Then I mix Garagax Sewer with Lamia Medium and add this to the bottom to really dirty up the Tabards and seals. I want these Crusaders looking like they've been fighting for months. The main armor panels are now done. Let's have a look at some of the smaller details. All the purity seals and the sword grips I paint with pink horror. And then highlight with Emperor's Children. And then a highlight again with Fulgrim Pink. And I give them a wash of Carroburg Crimson. Any skulls I find on the model or the base is painted with Rekarth Flesh. Shaded with Agrax Earthshade. And then layered with a mix of Rekarth Flesh and Palace Witch Flesh. Finally, I highlight with Palace Witch Flesh to create a pale looking skull which offsets the warm tabards and purity seals nicely. The leather is base coated with Doombull Brown. Then I layer on Scrag Brown. And highlight with Deathclaw Brown. You can also use this color to add some scratches to the worn leather. And finally, I shade the leather with Agrax Earthshade to dirty it up. I found that after painting all the metal parts, it really ties the models together. I paint all the metal with heavy metal from the John Blanche set. I also use this to slightly dry brush the edges of the armor to make them look more battle worn. Everything I want gold I paint with Emperor's Gold, which covers really nicely. I shade both the metal and gold with Grim Dark Shadow. Metal is highlighted using Shining Silver, and the gold with Canoptek Alloy, which is also the only non-army painter paint I'm using in this step. And now something I always struggle with, Space Marine eye lenses. First I base coat the lenses with Very Vermilion and shade them with Blood Angel Red. I have a paper towel ready to remove the excess contrast paint. Next, I dot the front of the lens with Wild Rider Red. And again with Fire Dragon Bright. If you make any mistakes, just come back later with your black paint and paint over it, which I had to do quite a bit. Finally, I dot white on the back of the lens to add a light reflection. The fun part of the Crusader Squad is the different models this unit has. There are 4 Neophytes in the squad, which for some reason are not allowed to wear headgear or long sleeves. So let's paint some skin. I start with a base coat of Doombull Brown. I then paint the skin with Barbarian Flesh. I needed 2 or 3 coats to get an even spread. I shade the skin with Warm Skin Shade, also from the John Blanche set. I then layer ruby skin on the raised areas of the skin. And then highlight the skin with opal skin. Just use a minimal amount because we don't want these neophytes to look too pale. Parts where the blood would be closer to the surface I shade with Berserker Bloodshade. Good points are the nose or metal connection points and elbows. The fatigues of the neophytes and the banners on the Space Marines I keep simple. I first base coat them with Corvus Black. Then highlight with Deep Gray. And highlight again with Uniform Gray. Black Templars either have candles on their backpacks or torches, so let's paint these as well. I base coat the flames with Very Vermilion. I also add a bit of OSL effects. I don't make it too drastic as I did with my Iron Jaws. I'm a little bit more subtle here. Next, I start highlighting the flames with brighter and brighter colors, making sure the base of the flame gets brighter than the end parts. First paint is Molten Lava, which I also paint on the OSL. Then I use Lava Orange, which is the final paint for the OSL as well. You always want the light source to be brighter than the OSL. The flames will get further highlighted with Glowing Inferno. And finally with Inner Light. Inspired by John Blanche's artwork of the Black Templars, I wanted the bases to have this reddish ochre look you see a lot in Blanche's artwork. For this, I first base coat the entire base with Banshee Brown to lay the foundation. I then paint all the raised areas with Ruddy Terra. A lot of these colors are actually from the John Blanche set. I'm a big fan of these sets, as you can probably tell. I mix Ruddy Terra with Very Vermilion and highlight the base, leaving the previous step still showing. I then mix Sunburst Ochre with Moonbeam Yellow and repeat the highlighting process, going smaller and smaller as usual to focus the light. I then mix Ivory White in the previous mix and create smaller highlights. And I end with a dot highlight of Ivory White to make the bases pop. Finally, I paint the rim of the base with Corvus Black. And here we have a finished Crusader Squad, ready to slay the Heretic, the Witch and the Xenos. I think this is a very fun way to paint Space Marines because it doesn't really focus that much on edge highlighting, and it makes them look grimy and battle damaged in a pretty easy way. As this is an entire new army, I have a lot to paint. In my next video, I will show you how I paint a vehicle for this army. In the meantime, be sure to follow me on Instagram, where I'll post photos of current projects and behind the scenes stuff. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and thanks for watching.